Welcome to the CareFinity End User Training Session. My name is Shauna and I'm going to be taking you through the training class today. Now, CareFinity can be accessed through a variety of means. One is through a website where that your organization might provide to you. You might have an icon on your desktop, you might have an icon on an intranet portal, or you might be accessing CareFinity right from within your EHR today. There may be some linkage from your EHR directly into the CareFinity application. Your organization will provide you more information about how to access the CareFinity application. For the training today, I'm just going to log in with a traditional username and password here from a website and click login, and I'm presented with the CareFinity application. Again, you might access the CareFinity application a variety of ways, and your organization can provide you that specific information. Once you're in the CareFinity application, you have two different ways that you can look up patient information. You can look up patient information through the patient search and search for a patient chart, or you can go to the appointment window and look up information based on the provider's appointment schedule. If you need to toggle the provider's appointment schedule, you can by provider or resource here at the top of the screen. You can select a different provider through the drop down. These, of course, would be populated with your provider values from your application and then the appointment date. And if that needed to change, you could change that information as well to search for any needed list of patients. And then once you get to that right source criteria and you get that appropriate schedule pulled up, you locate your patient. Clicking the icon to the left-hand side will actually open that patient record. For today's purposes, I'm going to search manually by patient name. I'm going to pull up my cupcake patient. I can search by last name, first name, date of birth, or medical record number, identification number from your source EHR, and click the search, and all of my records are going to display here that meet the search criteria. After I locate the patient that I'm looking for, if I click the icon on the left-hand side, it's going to launch me in to that patient record within the CareFinity application. Now, CareFinity has three different flavors, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that today, but depending on your flavor of CareFinity, you might be launched automatically into the appointment. You might be brought automatically upon login to the patient search screen. Or depending again on your setup, if you're launching CareFinity from within your EHR, we might pass that patient context from your EHR to CareFinity and open up that actual chart. And you might log right into CareFinity and it open up the patient dashboard that you see here for the record that you are working on in the EHR. So a variety of options, and just depending on the choices that your administration and implementation team have made, might determine how CareFinity actually acts for you. But at any time, you're always welcome to come up to this patient search. To me, that's kind of the key takeaway. I can always search for any CareFinity records manually through the patient search if desired. So when I log into CareFinity, I'm going to be logged in to one of two screens. Again, you have a configuration option that your implementation team have worked to set where you can log right into CareFinity and come to the dashboard view that we're seeing here or the timeline view, which we'll look at in just a moment. So that is a choice within your organization. So if you launch right into the timeline view, do not be alarmed. That is perfectly acceptable and an implementation choice that your organization has made. Whether you launch into the dashboard or the timeline view, either option is a great high-level overview of the patient's chart. So let's just dive into the dashboard first and take a look at the specifics. So I searched, just to recap, I used the patient search and I searched for my patient here using the patient search icon on the left-hand toolbar, and I searched for my patient, Strawberry Cupcake. So Strawberry Cupcake is the patient, and all of the data that I see below is related to that record. So I've got my Strawberry Cupcake, gender male, medical record number, date of birth, age, basic demographics. Then I have contact information, home, mobile. You might see a work phone number here, just depending on what's populated within the patient record. We have other information, insurance, pharmacy name, phone. And then here on the top right, I have a toggle button where I can toggle the information within the other information window. So all I need to do to perform that toggle is click the icon for the toggle here in the top right, and then I will see 3 additional demographic fields in my CareFinity application. I only have one configured in my demo system here, preferred pronoun, and that's by design just to kind of get your wheels turning as to what we could incorporate here for you. Your organization may have made different selections in these demographic fields. You may see 3 fields here. You might not see any information, or you might see 1 or 2 like you see here on my screen. There is no right or wrong, and each organization has the opportunity to define these 3 fields during your implementation, or at any time afterwards. If you decide you'd like a field link there, please just email support@medtechsolutions.com. That will get routed to our team, and we will be happy to help you get any additional fields set up that might be helpful to you. So when we're looking at CareFinity, this top section of the dashboard here is really demographics, patient information. When we get down to the bottom section, we begin to get more into the clinical components of the record. So you can see I have a panel here for diagnosis, allergies, medication, visits, labs, orders. If you look down the left-hand side of the toolbar, you're going to see similar entries: diagnosis, allergies, medications, visits, labs, and orders. These 6 items here on the left-hand side directly correlate to the options that we have on the right-hand side. So you can open these by either method. If I want to click on the left-hand side and open the diagnosis, I can click on my toolbar and open the diagnosis menu. I can also click on the diagnosis window, the show more, and get into that same window. So wherever I'm accessing the information from, whether it be the left-hand toolbar or whether it be from a panel on the dashboard, I'm accessing the same information and ultimately going to get to the same level of detail for that particular clinical component. So if we look at diagnosis here, you can see that we have 3 past diagnoses. This window is not full because I have a little blank space here, whereas if I look down at visits, you can kind of see that this panel or this widget is pretty full. So I probably have more information contained within the visits data. 5 data elements will display in each of the panels that you have here for these 6 items, and then anything more than 5 will roll into the show more window, but you can still access it. It's not unavailable, it's just not readily available here on the dashboard that's showing that abbreviated view of the last 5 items in reverse chronological order, with the most recent being displayed on the top. So if I want to get into my diagnosis, I'm going to click the Show More button, but I could also just click the diagnosis on the dashboard. Either way, it's going to take me into the details of the diagnosis data that we have available within CareFinity. Now, as we go through these 6 panels that we were just discussing on the dashboard, you're going to find similar themes among these panels, like the blue header bar, the ability to sort, the ability to pick columns, and we'll kind of review that on each one. So the nice thing about that is, while the data is different and the content is different on each of the topics, the way that we access them and the way that we use CareFinity becomes very familiar and very comfortable to us because we have that common theming among each of the areas and the different levels of data. So the first item here is the column selector. You can see that these columns correlate to the column headers that you see in the navy blue banner across the top. If I want to choose to remove any of these columns as an end user, let's say for my role in the practice, I don't need the status column. I can take that out and you can see it's immediate in real time. That status data is now gone. And now I have 6 columns selected, whereas before I had 7. There is no right or wrong about the columns that each individual user chooses to have. I would encourage everybody to tailor these screens to your particular needs within the practice so that CareFinity is most beneficial to you and what you're logging in to use it for. As you make changes to these columns, these are just for each user, so they will not affect anyone else, nor will they affect the practice as a whole or any type of defaults. It's just users. So feel free to make any changes that make sense for your role. At any time, just as I took the status column away, if I wanted to add that status column back in, I could certainly do that and make that data available for myself or my user again. The search window gives you an opportunity to search with three pieces of information. Maybe a search doesn't make sense, but when you have multi-pages of information, you have a patient that has quite a bit of data, multiple visits, encounters, maybe over the years, a search might come in handy. The search searches what you see on the screen. So if I wanted to search anything for a nail, I could click search and you can see I've got the one response there for the ingrown nail. I can clear that search and go back to my full list at any time. You also notice that I searched for the word nail and it found ingrowing nail. This search is searching anything within the fields that is a match. It's not simply searching on the first portion of the field or the description. So it does search everything that you see, more of an intelligent search that searches across the entire field of data. I have the opportunity to print. Now, print is role-based. When you log into CareFinity, you may have the print button or you might not have this print button, and that will depend on your role-based security that your administration team has configured. If you do not have the ability to print and you need that, please contact your administrator, your local administrator for the CareFinity application, and they can let you know if you're in a security group that allows for you to have that option or not. Well, if you do have the print button on all of these windows, you can print out that specific level of information, that specific component of data. And in this case, it's going to be the diagnosis codes. The print button does honor the filters that you have selected. So say, for example, I take out the status and now I hit print. The print is not going to include the status in the data now. So if there's instances where you may not want to share all this, maybe you like that feature and it would come in handy to answer a question or generate some documentation a patient might need, but you don't exactly want all of the information, you could certainly use the column selectors to parse that information down, print it out, and then go back and reselect those items so that you have them in your view. All of the column headers are sortable. So by default, they come out of the box in reverse chronological order with the most recent entry on top going backwards in time. All of these column headers are sortable. So if you want to click on them, you can sort, slice and dice the data, as well as taking advantage of the search option to find what you might be needing within that patient record. And then finally, the last thing I'd like to point out in each of the different data components is that we do page the view. So you can see that the information listed here is in a paged format. So we put 10 items to a page, and on that 11th item, the options to page forward and change the pages would illuminate, and you would be able to page forward so that you could scroll through all of the data that is available to you. Now, depending on your practice's setup and your security and configuration, you could potentially have the opportunity to access CareFinity on other devices. And that's where this page view comes in very handy, that CareFinity fits to other devices in a common way. So if I want to look at CareFinity on my cell phone, if I want to look and access CareFinity on a tablet or a laptop or a workstation with a really large monitor, CareFinity is going to size well to all of those different devices, and the page view comes in very handy on the different devices so that it becomes manageable. Scrolling is not always so easy as you get into other devices if you're not sitting at your desk with a mouse and things like that. So the page view becomes very handy in those alternate situations. So I'm going to go back to the dashboard just for a consistent process. We looked at the diagnosis panel. The next panel that we can look at is the allergies. And again, I can access the allergies from the Show More button or the same option would be available on the left-hand toolbar to be able to access that same data. When we went into diagnosis, I clicked the show more. So allergies, I'm going to click the toolbar on the left just to illustrate that you can get to this information either method. When we get into the allergies, you're going to find very familiar theming with the diagnosis. You've got your column selector, you've got the search, you've got the print option, you've got the headers that are sortable, and then you've got the paged view. Very similar, very comfortable, just different content. In diagnosis and in allergies, I had 7 columns total. As we get into other data elements, you're going to find that those columns vary because depending on the data element, we might have different information that would be pertinent to display to the end user. But as far as the utilization of the application, very common, very comfortable, a lot of the same processes available in the different areas just to aid your end users in ease of use. We realize you may not be in CareFinity every day. And so we want to make sure when you do need to access CareFinity, it's very user friendly and very comfortable for your end users to navigate. So going back to the dashboard, let's go into medications next. Again, very common feel here. I've got the column selector, and medications, I have 6 columns because that's what makes the most sense for the medication data. I can search, I can print, I can sort, I've got a page option, and then of course all my great content for this particular patient. Let's look at visits next. Visits, I have 5 columns available to me, and you can see those here in the navy header. They're sortable. I can search, I can print, and I've got my page view down here. I've got the visit level detail giving me a little bit about visit date, visit type, what they were seen for, who they were seen by, and where they were seen at. So very common data elements that we've pulled out of that source EHR and made available to you here in CareFinity. Labs would be the next one we might want to take a look at. When we get into labs, this one has a little bit of a different look and feel because the topic or the clinical content calls for that. So the header looks a little bit different on labs. We still have the print option here on the top right, and that performs the same function. But we have an additional download option, and we also have a new drop-down menu for lab category. The way labs are going to display to you is they're going to give you the opportunity to choose by lab, whether that be an individual lab, whether that be a panel. You'll have the opportunity to pick by lab. So in the instance of my CBC here, you can see that I have just one entry, and that's indicated by the 1 in brackets. So when I use that drop down, I can easily tell how many values I have for each of those items within CareFinity or within your EHR, however you want to think about that. And then in the top header, I'm going to have that panel or test name, and then I'm going to have all the dates across the navy header that that test was performed, and then the individual values. Blue, of course, indicating to us that that value was on the low side according to your lab vendor, and red indicating that it was on the high side according to your lab vendor. If I toggle and switch over to my bun, you're going to see I've got the 2 different values listed here, and it looks quite a bit different than the CBC did just due to the lab itself and the way that the components and the results are provided to us. Over to the right-hand side, I have the opportunity to graph, meaning I can graph my 2 values, in this case over time. If I had more values, they would be listed here as well, and graph so that you can see trending or any other information that might be beneficial when you're accessing this data via CareFinity. And then the last component of the dashboard is the orders. Orders is going to have a little bit of a different look and feel as well. You can see the very familiar section here across the top where I've got my columns, search, print, the things that I'm used to seeing. But now I have an additional option here at the top for order type. Order type is going to be what type of order was it? In certain applications, this might be your category. This might be referred to as an ACT class, just depending on how your EHR vendor categorizes this. But this is the grouping or the type of order. You can kind of see common elements here: diagnostic study, lab, referrals, so on and so forth. And so this additional filter across the top will allow you to filter at one level higher by the type of order it is. So if I only want to see my labs, I could filter down and see just the labs. If I only wanted to see the referrals that the patient has, I could do that as well, versus trying to sort that down through the search or any of the sort functions that you have available to you in the header option. So those are the dashboard items that we provide on the dashboard and the additional detail down the left-hand side. Again, navigation does not matter if you choose to navigate on the left side or the right-hand side. But in addition to these 6 data elements, we also have a few additional items listed in this patient toolbar down the left-hand side. The first one that we can take a peek at is documents. Documents represent the documents from your source EHR. These could be visit notes, these could be, work school excuses, any type of documents or documentation that's generated from your source EHR. We can choose to put that back into the CareFinity application. They start out with an all tab, but also is divided by document category or document grouping. So if you know what you're looking for and maybe the all list is pretty lengthy, you could jump into one of the categories and get a shorter, more focused list of what you might be looking for. Similar to the other areas of the application, you can sort on the header, you can search. The search in documents and images, just like the other windows, is searching what you see on the screen. It is not searching the content of the document. It's searching, your title and the details that we have available for the document itself. You can sort on any of the column headers in the navy bar and slice and dice your data however you might see fit. And then when you find what you're looking for, the icon over on the right-hand side will allow you to view that item and bring up a preview of that document. Once I have the preview of the document up, I have some additional tools on the right-hand side that I can take advantage of. You can hover over each of these items and it will tell you what it does and what options you have available to you. The two that I really want to focus on are the print icon and the save or download or export icon, just depending on how you would classify those. So the print and export, very similar to what we talked about before with the print button in each of the clinical data panels, is role-based security driven. So you may have these two icons or you may not, and neither is right or wrong. It just depends on if you have the privileges within the application to print and export documents or if that's not a needed component of your role. If you have any issues or questions about your security and your access within the application, please be sure and contact your local CareFinity administrator, as they'll be the ones that are most versed in what your organization has decided for roles and security within the application. But if I wanted to print this one document, I could click the print button and that would print out a hard copy of this one document that could be provided to the patient, or it could be exported, uploaded to a portal, whatever tools you might have available in that area. If we look at images, images are going to be presented to us in a slightly different way. On the documents, we had an all list and could kind of cruise through that all list or go into the different categories or groupings of documents. On images, we have a thumbnail preview, which is very handy to see a little bit about that image before I actually click on it. So if I want to go and see this cardiology note, I can't tell a lot from the preview, but I can definitely tell that this is probably a note from a referring provider or something along those lines, and I could click on it and get into the detail if I needed to. Once I open up the image, I still have those same rights over on the right-hand side, depending on my role and the security that's been assigned to me as a user, and I could print or download or export this document if needed. And then the last clinical element that I'd like to review with you in our session today is the vitals. Vitals, again, we've got the column selector here. I've got the different items across the top that I can sort on to slice and dice this information. And if I would like to graph, I have that opportunity as well. Maybe I want to graph this patient's weight, and you can see they've had a pretty significant weight loss between 2000 and 2024. Or weight gain, forgive me, a little bit of weight gain from 2000 to 2024. So you can kind of see and trend that information if that would be helpful. If you're dealing with any of the kiddos and you're using CareFinity, maybe in a downtime type of situation where your EHR is not readily available, you also have the opportunity to generate a growth chart if you would like to. You could show that to mom or dad on the phone if there's any questions. And then, as with the others, depending on your security, you may or may not have this print button, which would allow you to print out this information if there was a need to do that. So that rounds out the clinical data elements that we have available in the CareFinity application. I want to look back up to the timeline view that we mentioned at the beginning of the session. The dashboard and the timeline view are representing the same information in just two different views or two different styles of providing that information to the clinic. You can see here that I'm in a pretty zoomed out mode, if you will. We've got the years across the bottom, and we have the clinical data elements down the left-hand side. And of course, note my scroll bar. I scrolled down so we could see those dates a little bit easier. If I just scroll my wheel on my mouse, I can begin to zoom in, see how my dates are getting more granular and my information at the top is getting more detailed. Many of these elements that were combined before are now split out into their own individual singular elements. Some are still combined. I've got 2 here, 3 here, 10 here, for example. And if I want to look at any of these items, I just click on that icon and it brings me into the details and I can click and review any of that information. So it's displaying the exact same information that I'm getting through the dashboard or through any of the specific data elements down the left-hand side, but it's displaying it in that timeline or that linear view to where I can see what's happening based on a calendar type entry. I can zoom in, I can zoom out, and I can access this data however might be needed for the patient. So that rounds out the clinical components of the CareFinity application. We also have a financial component of the CareFinity application on the left-hand side. Some organizations elect to implement clinical components only. So if you do not have a financials tab, that is not out of the ordinary. It just depends on the use case for the clinic. And we also have organizations that choose to use CareFinity only for the financial component and they don't take advantage of the clinical items. You may not have these clinical items on your left-hand toolbar either. In either case, that's perfectly fine. It's just the output of the implementation and the decisions made by your organization. When I click on financials on the left-hand side, I'm presented with financial data again for this specific patient. So down the left-hand side, I initially see encounter number or visit ID, the date, who the provider was, and similar to the other windows, this top navy toolbar are the column headers, and in some instances, these items are sortable. But then I've got an additional header here in this beige header that is giving me totals information. So I've got the best of both worlds of my financials here. I've got total information listed in the beige toolbar, and then I have the specific date of service information listed in the line items below. So if you have a downtime situation, you're not able to access your source EHR, or you just happen to be in CareFinity, you want to look up this information, try to answer a question for a patient, you have this information readily available. This first screen is just the high-level overview to hopefully help you answer basic questions and see, what the status of the chart is. If you want to drill into any of these line items and get more specific detail, you can do that by clicking on the icon on the left. We'll now break down the encounter number, the billing date, the rendering provider, and then you can see the insurance. I can choose to see encounter details, which will give me all of my line items, which add up to those details that we were seeing at the encounter level on the screen before. And if there's any notes entered within that encounter note in your source EHR or PM application, we could have that available to us as well. So you can get down to the granular details if you need it, or you can look at just the date of service, high level information, just depending on what the patient's question might be and the information that we need to answer that question. So kind of the best of both worlds. You've got clinical data and you have financial data available to you within the CareFinity application. And then the final item that is patient specific on the patient toolbar is the export clinical data. Export clinical data is role-based security driven, so you may or may not have this option on the left-hand side. And again, if you don't have it, that just means that for your particular role in CareFinity, you don't have the need to print or export data. If you do have the need to print or export data, you will have this menu option on the left-hand side. In order to export data out of CareFinity, I simply select the data that I'd like to export. If you need to export everything, you can just click the top check in the blue toolbar header, and that will select everything on the chart. If you need to pick and choose, maybe you have a medical records request and it's just for a certain select dates, or maybe you just want to choose your visit notes, you could do that as well, just depending on what the request is and what you're looking to export. I do have the opportunity at the top to filter this information. The default out-of-the-box filter is documents and images because in most cases when we're exporting records, the document or the visit note, which is often a document, will contain all of the details that you need for that visit. So a lot of times documents and images are basically what we might want to export for a medical records request. But if you have any other needs, or maybe there's a special use case for that particular patient, you do have the opportunity to choose to export any of the clinical data elements along with the documents and images. It's certainly your discretion either way how you choose to slice and dice this data. For today's example, we're just going to choose documents and images. You can see here in your type column, an I indicates an image and a D indicates a document. If you needed to preview the document or the image before you exported it, you have the view icon and you can preview that information by selecting the icon on the row of the document or the image you would like to preview. If you know and you have enough information from the request that you have, you can just select that item and click export. When I click export, I'm immediately presented with a comment box. In this comment box, I would highly recommend documenting the date of the request, and we'll just use today, or we'll just do a default date. You would of course use a real date, and then you could even document who is being requested by. Whatever the case may be. This note only lives in CareFinity. It is not included on the export and simply ties back what you're doing in CareFinity to any paper documentation that you might have within the practice. I'm going to click the export and I get a prompt that tells me the export is started and will be available shortly. So I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom of the screen and you can literally see the export running here. And I had to do that quickly because I knew it wasn't going to take long when I just had 3 documents to export. The export runs very timely, but you probably caught your eye that it said exporting 0 of 3, exporting, 1 of 3, and it moves through the process until you get to the completed status. You can have multiple statuses listed here. You could have an error, you could have completed, or you could have completed with errors. Sometimes documents get corrupted in the database, or we might have a pointer in CareFinity, and for a variety of reasons with the syncing of data, we may not have access in CareFinity to all of the documents, and so there may be times where things complete with errors. And to see that level of detail, you can click on The clinical data exported, that's a clickable link, and you can see in this instance 3 out of 3 items were exported. So basically everything that I selected completed without errors. If you had any data or any documents or images that you had selected that we were unable to include in the export, they would be listed here for you. So you could then decide how you want to handle that situation. If you want to export a CCDA, you could click Export CCDA, and that's going to use the standard CCDA format and export a summary of all things on the chart. And then if you wanted to sort by date range, you could do that as well by just picking a from and a to date. And what that's going to do when you put those dates in and click filter, it's going to shorten your list of options to just those that are in that date range for you to choose from. So there's no difference in picking the date range versus clicking them here. It's just when you get into those larger charts and you have a longer list of items, that can be a convenient way to parse that list down to a shorter list, and then you can pick and choose the items that you would like to include. If I would like to preview the exported or combined document, I can click the preview button on the right-hand side. And then if I ever want to look at that note and see what was documented, I can click on the view icon on the left-hand side, and that will allow me to view that comment. If you ever see an export with a document and no view button, that just means that someone bypassed the export comment. It's not required that you enter a comment, although it is recommended. Anytime you come into the export clinical data, you'll be able to see the exports that have been done on the chart. So if you have any question, if something's already been completed, or if we need to go back and do that again, you can see the history here at the bottom. So I'm going to close the patient record because that concludes all of the content, both clinical, financial, and of course the ability to export data if you have those privileges for the patient. So in our session today, we reviewed the appointments, the patient search, and all of the data that's available within the patient chart or the patient record itself. Recently Visited stores the 5 most recent charts or records that you've opened in the CareFinity application. So if you ever need to toggle back to someone that you were just in, maybe you realize you didn't document something, you wanted to pull that information up, you wanted to see if the export is complete, maybe you start an export on one patient and you go ahead and go to the next patient to start another export, you can certainly do that and then easily toggle back to those records without having to do the full patient search again. And then the last option that you have available to you is to change your password. If you would like to manually reset your own password, you're more than welcome to do that. A lot of times upon implementation, you may be given a temporary password and your administration may encourage you to reset your password. You would just come to the change password option and put in that current password and then add in the new password, whatever you want it to be, and then type that one more time, exactly the same to confirm it. The password requirements that we have out of the box may vary with your organization, so I won't mention today any requirements, links, characters, uppercase, lowercase, special symbols. Every organization tends to put their own policies in place, and we certainly support that. So if you have any questions about your password requirements, please be sure and get with your local administrator, and they'd be able to share more information on that. Let's take a quick moment to recap what we've learned today. We've learned how to access a patient record in CareFinity based on an appointment. We've learned how to search for a patient record in CareFinity based on a combination of last name, first name, date of birth, and medical record number. We've learned how to review a record in CareFinity, both clinical and financial data, as well as how to print and export from that record. And we've learned how to change our password. I have 2 more items that I'd like to review with you in today's training. So I'm going to open up Strawberry's record again in CareFinity, and we see that toolbar that we reviewed earlier today. Now we have 2 additional items available within the CareFinity downtime application: patient notes and charges. Patient notes and charges both allow an organization during a planned or unplanned outage to capture notes and charges within the CareFinity application, and then once connectivity is restored, those notes and charges can then be pushed back into the source EHR. So let me walk you through how to capture a patient note in CareFinity. So the fields that you see across the top are fields that need to be filled in. Anything with a red asterisk is required. Otherwise, you either have a pick list or you'll see that the field is free text. So I'm going to type in hospital rounds here. The date defaults to today, and that will work for our needs, so we'll leave it as today. The provider is the provider of record. This would be your pick list of providers. The category would also be your pick list of categories from your source EHR application. When entering a patient note into CareFinity, I have two options. I can choose the free text option, which you see here now. I can type in any notes and information that I would like to be stored into the record, and I have formatting tools across the top should I want to take advantage of any of those. When I click Save, this note, just as it's typed, would be saved into CareFinity and potentially pushed back into your EHR depending on how your CareFinity application is configured. The template provides us a great option to choose a pre-formatted form that's been created by your administrative team, and we can document based on the prompts that are present in the form. So this is just a sample form, but the sky is really the limit as to how many forms that your organization can have and how they can be set up and formatted. So once I have that documentation completed in CareFinity, I'm going to click the Save button, and you'll see that I get the green note, that the confirmation that my note has been saved successfully into the CareFinity application. I click on Images and go to the CareFinity grouping. I'm going to see that note and that information present here for me in CareFinity. Now, if we take a look at charges, very similar to patient notes, but a little bit more formatting available to us. So I'm going to choose the facility of where the charge needs to be tied back to. Referring provider is optional. We need a physician or a provider from your group. The service date is going to default to today. The three different categories of CPT codes are configurable to your organization and your specific CareFinity install, so yours may look a little bit different than mine. But I'm going to choose from my pick list my CPT code, and then you'll see the description and the code defaults into the fields. And then I'm going to choose a diagnosis. So I'm going to go with diabetes and pick my diagnosis for today. I have the opportunity to populate 8 diagnoses and up to 4 modifiers for each charge submitted. When I click Submit, I'm going to get my green confirmation that my charge has been saved successfully. And then again, if configured for your organization, once connectivity is restored, any notes and charges that were entered into CareFinity would then be shipped over to your EHR for processing into your permanent medical record within your EHR application. All right, friends, the last piece of the training that we're going to look at today is the 2 features that you have available for your CareFinity Live Archive piece of your CareFinity application. You probably noticed that I've switched patients to the patient chart of blue-green in CareFinity. So if I were to open up blue-green's record, now I'm going to see 2 new additional items that are specific to your CareFinity implementation. Those are Patient Restore and SIG events. You may or may not see these options on your toolbar for specific patients for one of 2 reasons. One reason you might not see these options is because the patient has no data that has been archived yet. These options will only appear for patients that have had data archived from your source EHR into the CareFinity Live Archive application. You also might not see these options because they are tied to your role-based security. So depending on your role that you're assigned within the CareFinity application, you may or may not have privileges to view the significant events and to queue up a patient restore. If you have any questions about the access piece of the application, please reach out to your local CareFinity administrator, as they would be the best resource to explain or edit your access if needed. So let's first take a look at significant events. Significant events displays the event log from your source EHR application and replicates that into CareFinity for you. It's a courtesy to make this available, so at any given time, if you're needing to review a record that's been archived or somewhat removed from your source EHR system into the CareFinity Live Archive application, you can see that information and it'll be available to you so that you can review and take any action that might be needed. The second item to review is the patient restore functionality, again, on the specific toolbar for the patient. So what CareFinity Live Archive does, and what we've worked with your administration team to do, is set up a set of rules. And when a patient in your source EHR application meets the criteria or fulfills all the rules and settings that have been set, CareFinity Live Archive will archive part or all of that chart into the CareFinity application. Once that information is archived out of your source EHR, you will still see the visits and know that there were content there in your source EHR, but all of the content, all of the documentation, the notes, the images, the things that you might see in those dates of service will be archived into CareFinity Live Archive. A lot of groups elect to do this to take the strain off of servers and or applications as your database continues to grow. We store that information in CareFinity Live Archive, and at any given time, if you need that data back into your source EHR, you can come in and perform the patient restore function that we're about to demonstrate to you. So the patient restore takes the information that's now housed in CareFinity Live Archive and restores that back into your source EHR application. When I launch the CareFinity Patient Restore, I have the option to restore all of the data that's in CareFinity or a partial amount of the data based on date range. For today, I'm going to choose to restore last year's information. So I will just click on my date here and go back to January 1st, 2024 to December 31st of that same year, 2024, just as an illustration. So now I have that information entered here, and when I click restore, it's going to queue up that data to be restored. The CareFinity Live Archive restore process from the Live Archive application back into your source EHR is not real time. It runs every evening during off hours. Therefore, you will not immediately see this information available. However, when you come in tomorrow morning, you should be able to open that patient's chart in your source EHR, like blue-green's chart in this example, open that in your source EHR, and then you could review that CareFinity archive data in your source EHR, and there would be very few remnants, if any, to be able to tell that that information was archived and then subsequently restored back into your application. It would be in your source EHR, available to be used in any manner that you might use your data today. That concludes our CareFinity end user training session today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you all the best on your CareFinity journey.